Traveling to Amsterdam and the Netherlands was great for several reasons. Not only did I get to meet some great friends and colleagues for the first time in person, and even hang out with some fans for a kind of meet and greet, we were also able to do a kind of Spinoza pilgrimage. Since Spinoza is a person that we are all definitely very interested in, and frankly is one of the most fascinating philosophers of the modern age, it was great to walk in his footsteps, to see the places he grew up, where he lived, and of course where he wrote his influential works. Baruch Spinoza, sometimes known as Benedictus de Spinoza, was a 17th century philosopher who was born and spent all his life in the Netherlands. He came from a Sephardic Jewish background, his family having fled from Spain or Portugal at some point, and he grew up in the Sephardic Jewish community of Amsterdam. The city had a pretty sizable Jewish population, with a surprisingly large synagogue in which the congregation would gather for religious services. This synagogue, known as the Portuguese synagogue, still survives and can be visited today. The structure has changed very little since the time of Spinoza, even still being without electricity, basically being only lit by candles in the evenings. It's really beautiful. In other words, you can experience the place pretty close to what it would have looked like in Spinoza's own day and when he would have attended this synagogue. It was also probably in here that the leaders of the community would have made the fateful decision to have Spinoza excommunicated. You see, as Spinoza grew up and started his career as a philosopher as a young man, some of his ideas seem to have really made the Jewish leaders uncomfortable. Now, we don't know exactly the reason for his excommunication, but scholars will argue that it probably had something to do with his unique and daring ideas. But excommunicated he was nonetheless, something that must have been very tragic and certainly life-altering for both him and his family. He left his hometown of Amsterdam and would spend the rest of his life in other parts of Holland, where he would continue to develop his very unique philosophy. He lived in a house in Rijnsburg, close to Leiden, for a while, before moving to The Hague in the last years before his death in 1677 at the meager age of 44. Both of these houses are places that you can visit today. You can see his library in the Rijnsburg house, which has been reconstructed with his actual collection of books and even in era-appropriate editions. It's really fascinating to see what kind of books he had in his library, and which thus, of course, inspired his own thoughts and ideas. I spent some time in there with my friends just studying his collection of books, and through that, sort of getting to know him on a more personal level. Spinoza is known for two philosophical works in particular. Firstly, the Theological Political Treatise, published anonymously during his lifetime in 1670, a work that has been infamously called a book forged in hell by its strong critics. And secondly, his masterpiece, The Ethics, which was published after his death in 1677. And in these works, written in his humble homes in Rijnsburg and The Hague, he presents his daring ideas. Spinoza is famous partly for his perspectives on God and metaphysics. To him, reality consists of a single substance and its different modes. He defines substance as, quote, that which is in itself and is conceived through itself, and he identifies this substance with both God and nature. In other words, God and nature are one and the same thing to Spinoza, at least in some sense, and that means that everything is somehow a part of God. Or, as he says it, all things are modes of God, or of substance. This is why he has been associated with labels like pantheism or panentheism, simply the idea that everything is God, or that everything is a part of God. At the same time, others have called him everything from an atheist to a God-intoxicated man, which are very diverse conceptions of the man indeed. This idea in itself wasn't all that unique. Many philosophers and theologians in the past had said similar things, but Spinoza was a strong rationalist, inspired by earlier thinkers like Descartes, and he greatly rejected things like miracles and any personal conception of God. He believed in God as the one substance of reality, identical in some way to nature, but not in God as a personal being that could answer prayers or perform miracles. This obviously has a significant impact on his perspectives on scripture, religion, and the state. As a staunch rationalist, Spinoza cannot accept many of the stories of the Bible as true historical accounts. To him, the Bible isn't really concerned with knowledge as such in an intellectual sense. Scripture is primarily about an ethical message. He argues that the Bible was composed for a broad audience, for people that are uneducated and unsophisticated, and as a result, it takes the form of fantastical tales and miraculous stories which can convey the true message in a form that will speak to the common man through things like, well, like I said, like stories or metaphors. For the philosopher, however, it's clear that these stories must be read metaphorically or allegorically, getting rid of all superstition, which he sees as dangerous. This true religion, the message of which Scripture carries, is essentially an ethical one. To love God and to love one's neighbor is the core of all religion, which one should strive for. Not any of the incoherent, superstitious stuff that Spinoza promptly rejects. He rejects dogmatism and the way that the church and religious institutions claim sovereignty over the truth. He clearly separates between faith and reason, the domains of religion and philosophy. Religion is concerned with ethics and morals. Philosophy is concerned with truth and knowledge. Scripture, like the Bible, doesn't contain any metaphysical knowledge as such, only philosophy does. And this is what leads him to his very strong political message, one that is still very much relevant today. In essence, Spinoza very strongly emphasized the freedom to philosophize, freedom of thought and expression, as well as freedom of religion. He even talks about democracy and praises it as the best political option. He said, quote, "Freedom is necessary first and foremost for advancing science and the arts. For such pursuits are only cultivated with happy success by those who have judgment that is free and unhampered." End quote. Spinoza is thus truly one of the most important philosophers in history and certainly of the modern age, one that has had a major impact on our world. His rationalism and emphasis on tolerance and human freedom in society makes him a kind of forerunner to liberalism as it is known today, as well as contemporary thought in general. It's really wonderful that so many places associated with his life survive and can be visited today. Unlike when you study, say, medieval or even ancient thinkers, Spinoza lived relatively recently, and many of the houses and places that he visited or lived in, they still stand today. So you can witness the places where he spent his day working on books like the Ethics and experience the surroundings and environment that served as his backdrop, at least relatively unchanged. Being in his library in Riensburg was especially powerful, to see and study the books that would have been his intellectual companions in the very place that he actually lived and where he wrote his daring ideas. While the Jewish community of Amsterdam still stand by their excommunication, the city and country are today proud of Spinoza. He stands alongside figures like Descartes and Leibniz as foundational figures of modern rationality and important figures in the Enlightenment. His pantheistic ideas where all of the world is a single unity, that is, God or substance or nature, can be inspirational today, but also his rationalistic readings of scripture and heavy emphasis on freedom of thought and favoring democracy as the best political system. In the city of Amsterdam, there is a majestic statue of Spinoza close to the old Jewish district and the synagogue where he actually grew up. And in a very poetic way, the statue is placed in such a way that as the governor of the city looks out of his window, he sees the bronze statue and, perhaps most importantly, the words written on the monument. The purpose of the state is freedom, encapsulating the message and importance of Baruch Spinoza and his philosophy. I'll see you next time.